Hello and welcome to the Energy Markets Week, full week of sessions about energy trading and about the energy markets. You're most likely watching this session on the Swapcard platform, which is entirely dedicated to the energy markets. If you see all the other ENLIT sessions, don't worry, because you're still in the right place. Underneath the screen, you will see some names of people that are also joining us and watching this session. Most of you are watching the session incognito, so if you want your name to appear in the list, click on the yellow register button and you will also appear. And if you click on each other's profiles, you can network with each other. So now on to today's session. To open the Energy Markets Week, we have a very special guest here in our studio. Paul Giesbertz, Head Advisor Market Policies and Regulatory Affairs of Statkraft, and also a board member at EFET. Well, thanks for coming, Paul. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to be here.
That's good to hear. Well, we're going to talk about how offshore wind impacts the electricity market design. Now, some of the North Sea countries want to make progress with development of hybrid projects. Can you explain a little bit on what these projects are?
Yes, well, it's indeed a topical discussion now, and the offshore hybrid assets are basically connections, DC connections that have combined two functions. On one hand, they connect the offshore wind to the country, to the mainland, and on the other hand, they have an interconnector function. And this idea is very simple. If you only have a connection of the offshore wind to the mainland, this connection line is very often not fully used, because it depends on the wind output. But if you combine it with an interconnector, then you can always use the asset to the maximum extent by these two functions. And especially if the offshore wind is more further in the sea, this becomes a more attractive solution. And it's not a fake idea. It's already being implemented now. There is the Kriegers Flak hybrid asset, which is in development or should soon be put into operation between Germany and Denmark. So the two TSOs, Energinet DK and 50 Hertz, are developing this one. It would be the first one in the world. An offshore wind farm in Denmark, an offshore wind farm in Germany, and a 400 megawatt interconnector. And this could even develop further. Denmark wants to create a hub in the North Sea, an extra offshore wind hub in the Baltic Sea. And then it could also develop further into really a meshed grid, connecting more countries, even maybe connecting offshore storage, etc.
Okay. Then I have another question. In the meantime, also to the audience, if you have any questions also to Paul, you can fill them in the chat box on the right side of your screen. We can see them coming in, so if we have some time left at the end of the interview, we can also address some of your questions. Now I wanted to, so you asked, you explained a little bit about the projects, but why are they relevant to the design of the European electricity market?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's the amounts. We have ambitious targets for offshore wind. The EU Commission just published a strategy, and they want to achieve 300 gigawatts of offshore wind for the EU in 2050, 60 gigawatts in 2030. And that's the EU, so that's excluding UK and Norway. So these are enormous amounts, and of course they will impact market prices heavily. Yeah. And in addition, you indeed have also the market design question. The discussion is mainly on the question on bidding zones. To which bidding zone should these offshore wind be connected? And so, for example, if you take a Dutch offshore wind farm connected to the Dutch market and an interconnector to the UK, the first idea is to say that it's part of the Dutch bidding zone, the Dutch offshore wind, and that is called the home market solution. But it creates a problem, a challenge, because then the interconnector might not be used depending on the situation. So for example, if the offshore wind is producing at maximum capacity and the Dutch price is the higher price, then all the electricity will flow to the Dutch market. The connection will be fully loaded, and the interconnector to the UK cannot be used, even if the market price in the UK would be very low. So there's a big price spread, but the interconnector cannot be used. So this seems to be in conflict with the 70% rule, or the rule that says that at least 70% should be available for cross-zonal trade. So one solution to this would be to say that you create a separate bidding zone. Now, there the idea comes for this reason to create a separate bidding zone, and then suddenly both sides of the offshore hub are an interconnector, and then suddenly all capacity is always available for cross-zonal trade, and the problem is solved. You know? There is another advantage of a separate bidding zone solution, is that if there are any deviations after, for example, the day-ahead market, forecasts can change, of course, a lot, then you can accommodate this in the separate bidding zone solution without curtailing cross-zonal trade.
Okay. So if you have several separate offshore bidding zones, then you will have zones without consumption, or even well, with only one generation technology, only wind, and owned by one company. So what are the disadvantages of separate bidding zones?
Yeah, and indeed. So that looks rather remarkable. No?
Yeah,
There is, it looks like there is no competition possible. Still, it can work because this bidding zone is, of course, connected to the neighboring bidding zones, neighboring markets, and the competition will come from those markets. And the consequence is also that the price in this offshore bidding zone would always converge to the lowest price of the two. And that is a new challenge then. It means for the offshore wind, it's a disadvantage, no? Because you always have the lower price, so you have lower market revenues. And actually, there is an idea to compensate the offshore wind for this negative impact by allocating part of the congestion revenues to the offshore wind generation. Because you have two interconnectors, you will have congestion revenues, so you can use them to compensate the offshore wind for the lower market revenues. It seems logical if you want to compare it with the whole market solution that I described before. At the same time, it's also very remarkable if you take the perspective from the consumer, because normally, it's not always, but normally the consumer is paying the grid, is covering the cost and the risk also of the offshore grid. And normally, congestion revenues should be allocated to those who are carrying the cost. So in this case, the benefit should go to the consumer. But in this case, part of it would go to the offshore wind, which is extra remarkable if the offshore wind is not paying not only for the use of the grid, but also not paying for connection to the grid.
All right, I'm going to check in the meantime if there's any audience questions. I don't see any coming in yet. So feel free to use the chat box on the right side of the screen. Well, it's still, as you said, a remarkable situation, which you explained a little bit how it can go. But how will this discussion be organized? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's good. The discussion has to continue. You know, there are several aspects which are not yet addressed. You know? Because this discussion on bidding zones and the use of the interconnector is, of course, very, very important, but there is more. You know? For example, Professor William Hogan of Harvard University is one of the gurus of market design. He said when discussing market design, he said, start with the end. And with that, he means you should start with the balancing markets or the real-time markets, or in European technology, the balancing markets and the imbalance price. Because the imbalance price is the basis for price formation, also at the ad market. And it also it's important because it also should give the signal for flexible capacity, like storage, etc. No, and these aspects are not yet discussed. So how is balancing taking place in these hybrid assets? No? To which control area, to which balancing area will the bidding zone, will the offshore wind be allocated? Will it be this very small zone? Yeah. Topics that are not yet discussed. But not only balancing markets, but also forward markets are important. What we see is actually a very positive trend that new renewables are financed on the back of PPAs, commercial contracts, long-term PPAs, where the off-taker could be consumer, could be a market integrator, market participant, takes over the long-term price risk instead of the governments, who is basically now taking over this long-term price risk. So that's a positive development. But to foster that development, liquid forward markets are important because they allow to hedge risks at lower costs. No? And these are examples of topics that are not yet really discussed. So I don't know how this discussion will actually continue. No? We have a strategy paper now from the European Commission, which is very positive because it's a European question, and we have a European power market. So it's very good that we can discuss that at European level. In this strategy, the Commission also published a staff working document accompanying the strategy for offshore RES. And it seems as if the Commission says, okay, this is the framework, this clarifies the regulatory framework, this clarifies the market design questions. But as I said before, it does not really, because many topics are not yet covered. I mentioned balancing markets, forward markets, but also transmission tariffs. How should the transmission tariffs look like for the offshore grids? It's not being discussed. So I hope the discussion will continue in a broader scope, but also with more market participants, more participants in the discussion. So far, the discussion has been in the last years mainly between TSOs, offshore wind developers, and governments. And it would be good if also other market participants enter this discussion. They could be directly impacted because they want to be a PPA off-taker, as I just mentioned, but for sure they will be indirectly impacted.
And is EFET also actively in part of the discussions already?
Yes, of course. No, I think everybody is discussing this topic right now. You see in many associations, also Euroelectric had a conference recently on this, EFET as well. But as I said, they picked up the discussion somewhat late. They have not really been involved like many market participants, and but they're also looking forward to this debate. It's an interesting but important question.
So still a lot of work to be done, a lot of discussions to be had. You also mentioned the 70% rule.
Yes.
Can you explain this rule a little bit and how it's being implemented?
Yeah, the 70% rule is also a very topical discussion right now. It looks very simple. So it says that each network element, not only the interconnectors, but also the internal network elements, high voltage lines, transformers, etc. All of these network elements have to keep 70% of their secure capacity available for hosting cross-zonal flows, cross-zonal trade. So that looks rather simple, but at the same time, when you look how it is being implemented in practice, you see different approaches. So for example, if you take the German borders, Germany to the Nordic market, first of all, we have a new interconnector, which is being put into operation just last week, 2 weeks ago, Nordlink, between Norway and Germany, 1400 megawatt interconnector. And the capacity is allocated with a methodology where also the congestions, if they occur in Germany or in Norway, can limit the trade between Norway and Germany. But then each network element, so also these internal bottlenecks, have to keep 70% available, 70% of their secure capacity available for cross-border trade. To be precise, they don't start with 70% because Germany has adopted an action plan that allows Germany to achieve the 70% target in 5 years. So there is a linear trajectory. But basically, in my view, this looks rather good. It is according to the idea of the 70% target. But if you look at the other borders between Germany and the Nordic market, the DC interconnectors, I mean, between Germany, Denmark, and Germany, Sweden, then certainly the 70% rule is applied just to the interconnector, without any view on what is happening in the German grid or in the Danish, Swedish grid. So the 70% did not give the transparency on how internal bottlenecks are impacting cross-zonal trade yet. So this transparency that we have hoped for. Of course, it's also a very ambitious target, 70%, and that is obviously something we like, because in general it's well known that interconnectors play an important role in integrating renewables into the market, especially interconnections with countries like Switzerland or Norway, where there is a lot of hydro reservoirs. So the combination of interconnectors and this type of flexible capacity can provide short-term flexibility, but also seasonal flexibility. That is very important for the integration of renewables. So we like ambitious targets. So we like that these interconnectors can be used to the maximum extent, right? At the same time, there are bottlenecks, there are congestions in the grid, and also the traders do not close their eyes for this reality, and everybody realizes that we need that a secure grid, a secure system is the basis for the well-functioning of the market. So, but what I would like to see actually is that we would have a better economic assessment of the different options. Now, the 70% is a kind of arbitrary target. It's ambitious, but also somewhat arbitrary. Now, and if you would do an economic assessment, basically of the two options that TSOs have, either in case of bottlenecks, they can restrict cross-zonal trade, or they can do redispatch, basically. And the question is, which of the two options is most efficient for society? So if it's more efficient to curtail cross-border trade, to restrict cross-border trade, let it be, right? That, in my view, would be ideal. And so, for example, last summer was interesting in that respect, because last summer, especially in Norway, there was a lot of water. The hydro reservoirs were fully full, and prices were extremely low. So, especially in the south of Norway.
So cheap renewable energy.
Exactly right. And unfortunately, even we had to spill water. Right? So cheap renewable electricity could not be used, was lost, right? And that's a pity. And in these situations, it's of course extra interesting to export as much as possible from Norway to Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, etc., UK in the future. And so what happened last summer is that there have been grid congestions in Sweden, but also inside of the Netherlands. So for example, the Northnet cable between Norway and Netherlands, 700 megawatts, was restricted heavily for a number of weeks, quite a long time. So a very unfortunate timing, because you want to export this cheap renewable electricity in these circumstances. And so for sure, the reason was there. There were congestions inside of the Dutch grid, but still, we don't know, was the 70% target reached in this case?
Yeah.
And more importantly, was it efficient for society to restrict the capacity, to restrict the trade with Norway? And that is still something that we don't know. So this type of economic analysis is missing. What is the most efficient option for the TSOs to apply? And the 70% rule is, as I said, somewhat arbitrary, but you could also say it's a kind of a crowbar, and then it could work out positively if it helps to open the debate. And the debate on, with that I mean the debate on shifting bottlenecks to the border. We have had this debate for years, maybe even for 2 decades, with little progress. So the 70% target as an ambitious, arbitrary target could help to open this discussion, to get really some results on the table. At the same time, as it is a kind of a crowbar, there can also be some damage, and then we could have more discussions actually on this 70% target and more confusion, instead of the real tackling the real question, which is how to use the interconnectors to the maximum extent in an efficient way, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, coming back to the offshore hybrid assets, it's actually somewhat unfortunate that the 70% rule is so important in this discussion. It should not be about 70%, it should be about efficiency, efficiency of the market. And from that point of view, it might actually be helpful to consider to amend this 70% rule, to adapt it especially for this case of the offshore.
So you let it go and make it more flexible.
More flexible, indeed, if, of course, it helps to achieve this target, which is an efficient use of the interconnector, in this case, the efficient use of the offshore wind and the offshore interconnectors.
And then, well, maybe a bit of a difficult question to answer, but is there a kind of a timeline for the market design to be ready to deal with these hybrid projects in an efficient way? Is there an end goal, a date where they say a year, where they say now it has to be ready?
Yeah, no, I don't know. No, it's not defined. So as I said, I have the Commission in its strategy paper and in the staff working document gives the impression that okay, now it's clarified. Please go ahead. TSOs can make the proposal for bidding zones. Offshore bidding zones are okay. That's kind of what they say. So as if the discussion is over. I think it's not over. I said no. There are items that are not yet discussed. For the developers, I also think that they still have too much uncertainty. If the offshore hubs in Denmark need to be developed rather soon to achieve these targets, so they want, of course, clarity, and I don't think they have this clarity yet. So let's hope that the discussion is picked up soon. Of course, the Council of Ministers will have to look at this strategy, and then I think it would also be good to have a clearer time schedule, as you said, for these market design choices to be made.
Okay. Clear. In the meantime, I'm going to check, because we still have a few more minutes left. So if there's any questions, I'm going to check our platform. I don't see any audience questions yet. So, well, if there's no more questions, okay, I would like to thank you very much for coming over here. It was very special after almost 9 months, I think, to again see somebody from the energy trading community, because it was all on screens until now. So you're actually the first person after 9 months I'm doing a face-to-face interview with again. So that's really great.
Yes. So
thank you very much for coming and for sharing all these insights. To the audience, I hope you will join us this afternoon, because we have another very interesting live session scheduled at 2 o'clock. It's organized by the European Federation of Energy Traders, and it's called Towards a Pan-European Hydrogen Market. So I hope I'll see you all again this afternoon. And of course, use the platform to network with each other. You can just click on each other's profiles to set up a video call or to start a chat. Tomorrow we'll have a few sessions focusing on the Eastern and Central European regions. That's our ETSI sessions, so Energy Trading Central and Southeastern Europe. That's scheduled tomorrow and the day after. Also live session, so you're welcome to join again. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for joining, and see you this afternoon.
Okay, it was a pleasure. Bye-bye.